In this recording, we're going to talk about how to solve quadratics by graphing. So you've got some parabolas graphed here, and it turns out if we want to identify the solutions to where the f of x equals 0, it's pretty simple. You remember that the f of x is really the y, right? So we can pop over here and say, okay, y is 0 in a couple of places, right here and right here. And so those are your x-intercepts. Okay? So the zeros of the graph are when x equals -1. That's one x-intercept. The other one is when x equals 3. Okay, so we can identify the zeros or x-intercepts right there. -1 and 3. And now in terms of factored form, okay, we express it like this. F of x equals x. Okay, so to get this into a factor, it's going to be x plus 1. Because basically what I'm saying is, what's an expression that when I set it equal to 0, the value x equals -1 will make it a true statement. So -1 plus 1 equals 0, right? And the same for this. It's going to be x minus 3. So those are like the opposites, so that 3 subbed in for x is going to result in a 0 here. So there's our factored form. Okay. Why don't you try the second example and play the recording when you've got something to check. Okay, so hopefully you identified your solutions at -2 and +4. So we can write in those x-intercepts. In other words, the roots or zeros. I'm using lots of good vocabulary here. The roots or zeros are when x equals -2 and x equals 4. Okay? Those are the zeros are at -2 and 4. That's a crummy bracket. Let me give that one more try. -2 and 4. That's a nicer bracket. So the solutions to the graph are when y equals 0. And now in factored form, I can express it as f of x equals. I still need that negative in front. Okay, so I still have that negative because the graph is still reflected over the x-axis, excuse me. And now when we express our solution, our factored form, we're going to express it as x plus 2. Okay, so that -2 plus 2 results in a 0 factor. And then this would be x minus 4. So that's our factored form. All right, so finally, to summarize what we've got, to relate, I think you can see some cool connections here, some cool relationships, right, between the zeros, which relate to the x-intercepts, which kind of relate to the opposites of the factors. There's a lot of relationships here. We're going to summarize that here at the bottom, the relationship between f of x, its solutions, the zeros, and the factored form of the function. So in a quadratic, f of x, the x-intercepts are at a0 and b0. So a and b just represent any number, any real number. Okay? How does that relate to the zeros? Okay, so the solutions are the values a and b, because those are the values that make the y value equal to 0. The zeros of f of x are a and b. And finally, the factored form of f of x is x minus a, x minus b, so that the value of a results in a 0 factor here, and the value of b, subbed in for x, results in a 0 factor there, which would overall result in a 0 for f of x. Thanks for watching.